Thank you for having me. I want to talk to you a little bit about the long-term infrastructure planning, particularly from a technology perspective. You've covered very well the basis of demographics and forecasting that, and we tend to be fairly good at doing that. And we all are aware of the forecast of what's happening to the planet overall and what the implications of that might. And so there's the third component. What are we doing technology-wise that might affect many of these things? A little bit of background about myself, because you may ask yourself, why am I here and where did that come from? So as you might surmise from my height and my name, I grew up in the Netherlands, and when as a child I moved to the United States and gradually made my way west from New York to Texas to California, where I've spent the majority of my career. I ended up in the technology industry after finishing at university and ran a worldwide organization looking exactly at the future of technology and trying to productize that. And I spent most of my career in the technology industry. But for the last number of years, I've primarily been at Plug and Play Technology Center, where I've seen many thousands of startup pitches. And then now I'm full-time at Stanford University. So between those three perspectives, I've seen many different technologies. So if I don't tell you anything you don't already know, feel reassured, because that means we don't either. And there's a lot of money flowing behind those technologies. And one of the reasons I'm here in New Zealand today is many of my relatives moved here after World War II, and we have many family connections to this wonderful land of yours. And also, I've repeatedly hosted a group of your women leaders in Silicon Valley through an organization called New Zealand Global Women, who are really looking at expanding diversity and inclusion in the leadership of your national organizations. So grateful to get to know them. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the title futurist, because I'm not sure it means anything necessarily. And I also don't want to come here pretending to be able to predict the future better than any of you can. When I look at most of the predictions from 10, 20, 30 years ago, most of them are wildly off. But we're pretty good at predicting some things. Like, even though you can be surprised by accelerations in population, we tend to see those things coming from a statistical point of view. We tend to understand the forces that drive them. And we cannot like what's happening, but we're not very surprised by them. And similarly, on things like climate, obviously there's a worldwide discussion going on right now, and we have a fairly good understanding of what's happening, what we might be able to do about it, and otherwise what might happen. We may not like those things, but we have a pretty good understanding of what's happening. Technology is different. Technology tends to go in kind of bumpy advances. In one of the earlier presentations, you may have noticed there was this electric scooter. In many cities, these electric scooters are actually causing infrastructure problems because none of the infrastructure is built for it. There's no places for them to go in the cities. There's no places to park them. People leave them all over the sidewalks, and yet young people are using them to get around. We've been trying for decades to get people to ride their bicycles instead of driving cars, and all of a sudden people go, well, that's great, except I don't like hills. So now we have these electric bicycles, but unfortunately they go about 3 times as fast as the old bicycles, so that's creating new problems. Technology tends to, even simple things like that. When a company like these shared transportation services like Uber come around, they tend to disrupt what our cities look like, because all of a sudden we have, previously we had taxi drivers, we kind of knew how to deal with that. Now we have Uber drivers, and they behave differently, and all of a sudden the transport dynamic changes in the city, and it creates new problems and solves others. When electronic mapping services come around, and all of a sudden people find out they no longer need to be on this congested artery because they can go through these little neighborhood streets, we need to adapt to that. So technology tends to rapidly disrupt what we thought and make a 30-year planning process very hard. But from my perspective, again, of some of these things that are coming in, hopefully I can give you some inspiration and help you in your planning process. So in all forms of starting, funding, planning, and creating big things, what it comes down to is probabilities and risk. Time, how long do I want this to last? How long is it going to take to build it? What kind of maintenance am I going to have to do over its expected lifetime? Who's going to benefit? How much is that benefit? And then also there's strategy. There's always a combination of setting ourselves up for what we think is going to happen, enabling ourselves to be reactive to things we may discover along the way, and being intentional. What do we want to happen? So some aspects of predicting the future actually is creating a future, and that's an incredible power you have as a government. When we look at ways of paying for these things go hand in hand. I grew up as a scientist, as a technologist, as an engineer, and yet you discover along the way that if you don't understand the finance, it's not going to work. It never does. And I hate to say that that drives everything, but it drives a lot. You need to understand how the finance works. So for many things, we pay as we go. We self-fund. And you can think of this in infrastructure terms, for instance, in terms of when you put something on a train, whoever puts something on the train actually pays for the load that goes on the train. When you cross a bridge and you put a toll gate on there, whoever crosses the bridge pays to cross the bridge. And many small businesses get created that way as well. In venture, we're sort of on the opposite side of the spectrum. We assume that out of 100 things we fund, maybe 1 or 2 will be successful, but they will be on an exponential return, and they will pay for all the other 100 things that aren't as successful and that didn't work out the way we predicted them. In government, you kind of have to do a little bit of both. You have to look out for the public good. And the other incredible power that governments have is that they get to make plans beyond the lifespan of an individual executive or shareholder. They get to look beyond the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years that I would look at as an investor. And they get to look truly at 30 years in terms of that return with as the stake the public good. In addition, they get to put maybe not even an explicit, but a direct value on intangibles like wellness, equity, fairness, happiness, population things that as a shareholder I may not be able to quantify as easily. So in that spectrum of being intentional and reactive, again, if we break this down, there's always the usual sort of filling potholes, doing maintenance, OPEX, and so on. And these are infrastructure projects. They cost a lot of money. We got to do them because not everything we built 30 years ago can just keep operating without us spending any money on it. So we need to dredge our ports and repave our runways and do things like that. We can also spread things out over the cost of an expected lifetime of something. When we build housing or freeways or schools, we say we expect to get about 30 years, 50 years, whatever of use, and we can essentially spread that cost out. Sometimes we get to put in lead time. You know, when China does very impressive things like build hospitals in 2 weeks, that's an amazing accomplishment. But they could have built those hospitals 5 years ago as well, you know, and spread out that cost over a long period of time. When also we experiment with large solar farms, we don't know if the whole world's going to go to solar farms, but we're going to see by actually building one what it actually costs to do and what it costs to operate and what the unintended consequences are of operating that way. Same with desalination plants. And then also, obviously, we got to periodically replace our sewer lines and power lines and upgrade the grid and do things like that. It's a lot like seeding your crops and then harvesting them later. There's also an element of risk aversion. You know, having grown up in a country that is below sea level, which many other countries will be in the foreseeable future, being proactive about that is actually an intentional act. You can say it's a very low probability event that water will come this high, But if we don't spend the money now, we will be faced with a catastrophe that at the time sandbags won't help with. So large amounts of money get spent up front for a low probability event that hopefully will never happen. All that is important. Those are all parts of forecastable things that governments do. But governments can also do more. They can play the long game. They can play these intangibles. And that power of transformation is really where potentially technology can help with. It's like creating your own weather. It's an incredibly optimistic power where you can actually say, this is what we want the future to look. So sometimes we put something in a place, not because we can exactly forecast what return we're going to have on it, but because we want that to happen. It's not a prediction, it's a choice. And that transformation, when countries put in high-speed rail, when an oil-producing country decides to become a tourist or transportation hub, when ports get built, I won't get into that debate, when countries choose to turn land to sea to land and turn it into wind-powered farmland, or when people set aside incredibly expensive parts of cities and turn them into parks that for more than 100 years afterwards improve the quality of life for the population there. Those are intentional acts of transportation. When we look at the subway systems of, you're talking about your light rail system, you look at the great urban transportation systems, most of them were built in the 1800s. London, Paris, New York, those were all built when there were steam trains running through those tunnels. It's incredibly intentional transformational acts. And in many of our acts, the reason we're somewhat okay today is because we had that intentional and reactive capacity. So our highway system, and obviously this is not a New Zealand highway, this is one at home that I sit in every day. It's not a pleasant place to be, but it's reasonably okay because of extra capacity that was built in years and years ago. When many of our cities 30 years ago we were looking at, people were leaving the cities. Cities were becoming these blighted places that nobody wanted to be in. New York had an enormous exit of people. San Francisco, the same thing. Right now we can't build fast enough because everybody wants to be in the city. The commuter rails are actually running out from the cities because the jobs are outside the cities rather than in the city. Our power grid is a similar sort of reversal. It was built for centralized generation, and yet all of us are putting solar panels on our roofs, and all of a sudden we have all this local generation. The grid is struggling with it, but it's managing so far. We're bursting at the seams. And of course, technology comes in here because, one of our local power companies, literally headquartered a few miles from my house in a building that used to be an HP building that I used to be in as a researcher, is actually contributing to this by saying all of you want to charge your car at home instead of filling it up at the local gas station. And when I look at our water infrastructure, again, these 100-year type investments, not even 30-year type investments, incredible foresight, but facing constraints and life cycle issues today. So let me state the obvious about future needs. Demographics and so on can be forecast, long-term trends in climate and so on, but not all things we built before are building today will last forever. We are terrible at predicting the future of technology and its impact on society, and even things that everyone believes turned out, everyone believes today can turn out to be wrong and material. And so if we look 30 years forward, let's first look 30 years backwards real quick. Is it a long time? Well, if you look at this, 30 years ago, Air New Zealand introduced the 747. They just phased them out. That's about a 30-year time span. And now there's a plane that looks a lot like a 47. That futuristic train from France, still running as a futuristic train in France. The Hubble Space Telescope is still taking beautiful pictures. It was just launched then. The #1 selling car looks a lot like the #1 selling car on the road today. So 30 years doesn't seem like that long a time. But then when you look at my industry, there were a total of about 100,000 internet users worldwide. And they were using dial-up internet by and large. Computers were these clunky big things, cell phones were too, the gaming industry and so on. We predicted video phones and flying cars, but nobody really knew which was going to happen. So what is the possible role of technology in this? It's very tempting to focus on that first part, cause changes to future needs. So flying cars, hyperloop systems underground for rapid transportation, satellite networks to give everybody internet access, you know, whether those are low altitude or high altitude, and whether they're going to cover the entire planet or only the densely populated parts of the planet. It's very tempting to create a science fiction movie and then base your planning on that. And again, if you look back at how well we have done at that historically, not very well, because technology tends to follow the money and disrupt these things. What we are much better at with technology is allowing us to react faster and helping us predict future events and needs much better. And this is where the disruption has actually already happened. And this is one that you have probably already made significant investments in, but haven't quite seen the consequences of it yet. So when I give my list, and I could have made the whole thing just about this list, and on the left you see all these startup incubators everywhere where all these things are cooking every single day and where everybody's trying to create new things about this. A lot of them have a combination of these technologies in them in some form or another. And if you notice, all but a couple of them are digital technologies. And that is an enormous disruption that has already happened. When we look at Internet of Things and ubiquitous sensing, there is a lot of discussion about the privacy implications of that, about the data storage needs of that. But really, when you think about that, is we have this incredible thing already coming into place, where we have more data points about more people and things doing everything in there every time, trillions of sensors around the world that are constantly telling us exactly what's going on. That's happening. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Then there's this supposed magic, AI, machine learning, deep learning, and so on. 30 years ago, that was still very much in its infancy. There were toy systems at universities trying to do things that didn't really matter yet. I know, because I wrote some of those toy systems. So today, those things have come of age, and cars are actually driving themselves in real time using edge computing, so a combination of IoT and AI and machine learning today. Containers are unloading themselves from ships, drones are flying to inspect bridges. All of that is based purely on visual sensing and AI and deep learning. Autonomous vehicles are very rapidly coming. If you would have told me 5 years ago that every day on my commute today, which I do, I would see autonomous vehicles, and that they would drive at least as well as the vast majority of drivers on the road, I would have said, no way, we can't do that. And I've been in artificial intelligence and machine learning for most of my career. And yet that disruption happened. And all of a sudden, cars are actually driving themselves. The implication of that hasn't happened yet. You know, right now, they're just driving like everybody else. They're sitting in traffic like everybody else. They haven't actually improved flow yet. But that's the next step. There's augmented reality, virtual reality, simulation, and generative AI, which together are giving us ability to have much higher productivity in our infrastructure construction projects, in our yields, in understanding what might happen. And of course, we've made very large investments in wideband networking, soon with worldwide coverage. And what that means is everyone and everything, no matter how rural, no matter how remote, is going to have the same digital access as everybody else. And when a sensor is somewhere in a remote agricultural region or on a mountaintop, it'll work just as well as if it's right here in the middle of Auckland. Now, a couple of areas that there's been a lot of talk about. You've probably heard about blockchain, which essentially is the secure, immutable, infinite data stores with consensus and truth mechanisms. They're there, but we haven't quite figured out what to do with them. We think we can do escrow better for container shipping. There's things like that that are starting to happen. But the killer sort of application, we know it's coming, we just don't know what it is. And that's a little bit, as a friend of mine said, it's a little bit like when the HTML language was published. It took a few years between when that language came out and when it resulted in the World Wide Web, which today, of course, none of us can think of a world without that. There's incredible advances in decarbonization. How that's going to pan out, we haven't quite figured out yet. Is it going to be hydrogen? Is it going to be other things? We don't quite know yet. We just know that we're pushing really hard. And then nanotechnology is going to lead to new materials, quantum computing. People put vast amounts of money into. We don't quite know yet how that's going to pan out. So basing your forecast on that today, basing your planning on that today, be very hard. But they're all the building blocks. What they all have in common is that they center around data. Digital transformation, don't get me wrong, has been an incredibly heavy lift so far. And we're kind of heading into that trough of disillusionment around that. So in infrastructure, we have digital twins of everything. We monitor everything. We simulate everything from, we can do everything from inspecting our pipelines and bridges to improving the yield of our construction process, having fewer rebuilds, having more precision, having better materials, and so on. But has it really caused a revolution yet? Probably not. And so there's an analyst firm called Gartner, which describes this as the technology hype cycle. So we have this enabling technology. We go into this peak, which they already call it the peak of inflated expectations. We think it's going to disrupt everything right now. And then we go on this trough of disillusionment. We go, it didn't work out. But then gradually, people start to figure out how it actually affects us. So in many industries, that happened. Healthcare right now is deep in that trough of disillusionment. It's where I spend a lot of my time. We spend all this time making all of healthcare go digital, and yet we're still waiting in the waiting room just like we used to before. Hasn't quite changed yet. Hasn't quite revolutionized yet. We're not quite designing molecules exactly to treat everybody's cancer individually yet. But it's starting to happen. This is pretty typical. Insurance industry is starting to climb out, and we're starting to see that we're getting much better at risk. So IoT is one of these areas that's just like that. When IoT started, we just had things. You know, we didn't call it Internet of Things. We had sensors and actuators, and they were connected by copper wired. And when the sensor said the temperature's too low, a signal went to the furnace, and the furnace came on. Nobody said, oh, that's IoT, this is magic, you know? We just thought it was a thermostat. We started to gradually get more and more remote monitoring. We had network things, so when a patient's in a bed, we could actually sit at the nursing station and see the heartbeat of that same patient going on in real time. Again, nobody said that's IoT. No, that's just a bedside monitor. We don't think anything of it. Gradually, the logistics industry got involved, and with simple technologies like barcodes and handheld scanners and so on, we revolutionized an entire industry. We figured that delivery trucks needed to only, in this country, probably make left turns, in the US, make right turns, and shave off many percentage points off their routing times. And it led to real improvements. Then we kind of overpeaked. We said, oh, we're going to connect everything. So all of a sudden, that perfectly good thermostat we replaced with a network-connected thermostat, and it's cool that we can control it from our phone, but it wasn't that big a deal. You know, it's still a thermostat, and it had these learning things. So now it can set your house to the wrong temperature when you didn't want it to, and it decided on its own. It's lovely. My mom can see my weight on my digital scale. It's lovely. We had open APIs for everything, but we didn't quite realize the productivity yet from all this stuff. It was really cool. Now we're starting to get to that convergence where the sensors and the actuators are actually connected to one another, and where the supporting services are in place. So the mapping services, the sensing, the actuators, they're all coming together. So with all that data, and you see that gradually we get into that plateau of productivity. So as we monitor things, as we gather gobs and gobs and gobs of data, we can actually do useful things with it. So with all that data, can we predict the future? This is the magic 8-ball, which those of us who don't know what we're doing, we just shake it and out comes whether the future looks good or doesn't look good. But does that mean we can do better than what we always have? And the biggest question is, didn't we always have statistics? Weren't we pretty good at this to begin with? The biggest thing that has changed is that we have many more data points, many more data points, and more information about those data points. We are monitoring more people, more things over more time, more comprehensively. We have more compute, storage, and networking capabilities to do something. But we have a lot less control over how that data was generated. We're no longer doing the carefully designed studies to actually control the circumstances. So there's a lot of temptation to do the wrong thing. I'm not just talking about stealing the data or doing bad things with that, all the security stuff, but also statistically doing the wrong thing, drawing the wrong conclusion by just drawing a straight line through data points that randomly came at us. We have more hypotheses, we have more confounders, we have more spurious conclusions from all that data. So statistics has actually also evolved. We have ways of correcting for that. And that is really why we don't call it often statistics anymore. We start talking about it as data science, but really it's the same people with new sets of techniques. So we have much more powerful, accurate models, much better explanatory as well as predictive capabilities and ways to deal with these problems, and a lot more attention to how the data is stored, protected, used, and regulated. And this too is an infrastructure requirement for the government. Let me remind you that data does not change the present. Just because we measure it doesn't mean we actually change it. We just know more about it. It changes our understanding of risk. We can actually get much better. We can have narrower confidence intervals. We don't have to be surprised by things that we sometimes get surprised by. It makes our predictions more accurate. It reduces the variance around our predictions. It also enables us to respond to some things in real time. I was really glad to hear that you said infrastructure is 70% maintaining and better using the things that you have, and 30% maybe thinking about what you're going to build next. That 70% data can be incredibly helpful, making our cities smarter. We all say, oh, that's another one of those cliche terms. What it really means is we can respond instantaneously to capacity needs, and we can shape utilization and behavior by adjusting things like pricing, by opening lanes, closing lanes, adding more buses, making things harder or easier, and steering people's behavior. Data also enables us to make rational long-term choices. So it enables us not just to predict, but also to simulate and test scenarios much better. And you'd be amazed at what we can do and how accurate these simulations are. We can try every possible scenario of what the current health crisis might imply for, say, your port capacity over the next few weeks or months or years, and really have realistic, even though it sounds like we have no idea what's coming, people have a pretty good idea. How much do we want to spend to be ready for what? This is the age-old question that every person buying insurance always has. This is also what every infrastructure investment is always about. How much do we want to spend to be ready for what? But the second part is, that's the reactive capability. The second part is, who do we want to be? What do we want to shape the future to be like? Always that combination of being able to be reactive to whatever's coming our way and paying the price up front to be ready for that, and being intentional, making deliberate choices. So just so we don't get caught falling off the cliff ourselves, the digital world is here, and some countries are way ahead in terms of actually taking advantage of that and using it in their infrastructure planning. What's the public infrastructure responsibility and opportunity would be a good question. I know there's areas where just doing your part, when we look at things like climate, as a small country with a very small percentage of the world population, you can say, well, no matter what we do, there's nothing we can do about that. So that also gets in the game of, in areas where humanity needs to act as one, can you set an example? Can you say these are your national obligations and commitments? But the biggest part is, of course, readiness, dealing with lead time, dealing with preparedness, dealing with avoiding paying a premium later, and strategic, intentional choices. Who do you want to be? Thank you very much.